The signs of climate change are spreading. A record-setting drought in Europe has pushed the Danube River to historic lows. As the river drives up, old Nazi ships are being revealed. Here at home, dry conditions have revealed dinosaur footprints in Texas. That's right, actual dinosaurs. These rising temperatures aren't going anywhere, and the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act includes some of the most significant environmental investment in our nation's history. That means not only reducing pollution, but reimagining how we build, where we live, and how we travel in the future. Joining me now to discuss, Jay Ellis. You may know him from hits like Top Gun, where he was Payback, and Insecure. I actually liked you in Escape Room also. He is also the host of the Smithsonian Channel's How Did They Build That? And Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali, Executive Vice President of the National Wildlife Federation. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Jay, I'll start with you. Look, everybody knows you from Insecure. I was Team Lawrence, at least after the first season. And you know, most people know of your work in other areas. You know, they've seen other movies that you've done. How did you become interested in architecture? And what are some of the trends that you've seen in building sort of sustainable buildings that'll last the test of time since you've been working on the Smithsonian Channels? How did they build that?
Yeah, you know, I think my love for it actually just came around. My dad was in the Air Force, so I think moving around so much as a kid, I think that's where I kind of really fell in love with architecture, just getting to see so many types of architecture and styles of architecture around the world and different cultures and different cities, even here in the States. And I think, you know, being a part of the show, I live in a city in Los Angeles where we often tear down our history and we rebuild. And I think one of the bigger trends that I've seen not only in LA recently, but getting to do the show and getting to do How to Build That is you're starting to see a lot of folks really pay attention to not only green, obviously, and sustainable, but how are we also repurposing structures that already exist, right? So we're creating less waste and less damage to the atmosphere and the ecosystem around some of these structures.
Dr. Mustafa, this is really interesting because, you know, in the state of California, right, they've just passed this new law that says, hey, you know, no more gas-running cars by 2035 can be sold within the state, right? And so we've seen all sorts of studies that say not only, of course, did that lead to pollution and everything else like that, but also the kind of emissions that come from your fossil fuel vehicles, they erode buildings, they affect roads, they have an impact on crops and the environment and everything else like that. What kind of immediate impact do laws like that have on sustainability? Is it actually going to lower the price of these cars? Is it going to cause worker difficulties? What's the impact of laws like this?
Well, it's going to increase production of zero emission cars, which is incredibly important. Let's just break it down. It's incredibly important for our communities because we have 200 to 300,000 people are dying prematurely every year from air pollution. More people are dying from air pollution than are dying from gun violence. And we know the significance of that issue. So what we find is that when we can stop the pollution coming out of these tailpipes, then we can also make sure that the 24 million folks who are suffering from asthma, that we can mitigate some of the things that are happening there. We also know that that pollution that's coming out, you know, impacts structural items that we are building on. So we know there's been significant disinvestment over the years in Black and brown communities. So anything that we can do to lower the emissions that are coming out of those tailpipes, that are impacting people's health, that are impacting sort of the building that's going on, and at the same time helps us to address the climate crisis is a win-win-win.
Jay, I want to take this back to you. I, like you, my dad was in the Air Force, so I used to travel around the world, see a lot of different kinds of buildings, artwork, and everything else like that. I want to play some sound from your Smithsonian Channel show, How Did They Build That? And get your thoughts on the other side about what this experience has been like and some of the other things you've learned about not just what we do sort of environmentally and structurally here, but what we do abroad as well.
You look at it and you're like, is that going to work?
And would push the team to its very limits.
We were sort of clawing our way up these slopes.
This is Little Island, a huge idea that took 17 specialized teams of engineers, fabricators, and gardeners 10 years to complete. So how did they build it?
You know, Jay, there's this idea out there that environmentally conscious and sustainable things can't be pretty, right? I drive a Mustang, and if it's not gas powered, it's not going to rev the same way. Oh, if we make buildings that are environmentally sound, they're all going to look like boxes. Clearly, this show has demonstrated that you can do both. What are some of the most amazing structures that you've seen, amazing bits of architecture and engineering that you've seen while hosting the second season of How Did They Build That?
You know, I got to think, I would say 30 St. Mary's Axe with the Gherkin in London is by far one of my favorite. They decided to not put any, typically when you see these giant structures, you see like tons of power plant equipment on top of these buildings, right? Creating noise, they're obviously emitting gases out into the atmosphere, and they chose not to do that. The exoskeleton of this building actually opens and closes so it can cool itself and heat itself. So that definitely is one of my favorite. There's the Singapore, in the airport, they did an indoor garden, which I thought was also just such a beautiful thing. It's like 60,000 plants, 3,000 trees, and it is absolutely, and it's huge. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. And again, that was a way to both clean air and also just provide a green space for people in a way that, you know, they have a harsh summer sometimes, and it gets pretty humid and pretty hot there. So they want to be able to find ways to make the experience of travel slightly different for folks. I'm trying to think what else, man. I mean, the Florida Polytechnic Innovation and Science Technology building is built in a swamp in Florida, which is absolutely insane. And that swamp was kept intact and not degraded. I think that was one of the most important things to the architects and to the engineers when they went to go build that, is how do they make sure to keep the integrity of the swamp and keep the ecosystem healthy and clean. So I think, you know, across the board, I think we're seeing it around the world. We're seeing, you know, folks really pay attention to how our structures and our building affects the climate and the humans.
I got to tell you, it's been great talking to you both today. Jay, Ellis, I know you all are fans. I've had tons of people texting me about this one way or another. People either love the characters you play or they hate them. You're like the Blair Underwood of our generation. But thank you so much. Please check out his show, How Did They Build That, on the Smithsonian Channel. Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining us on The Cross Connection.